We're glad you're here today. I'm Michael Flake. I'm an associate pastor here at the church. I'm also the leader of the Davidson campus. I give oversight to Missio Dei as well. And so it's been great to have many of you come up and to see the Davidson campus. Like we say, it is a different expression of the same heart of Lake Forest, Huntersville. We're trying to do it intentionally different so that we can reach out to as many people as possible with the great news about Jesus. And so you'll have a friend for whom Huntersville is the right fit and a friend for whom Davidson is the right fit. And we want you to have seen both so you'll know who to invite to where. I'm glad to get to be here with you today. Today is the last sermon of a series called Re-Gift. Aren't you sad about that? This has been a fine series, but I'm going to be teaching today out of Luke chapter 17. So if you're someone who likes to follow along in your own Bible, you can turn to Luke chapter 17. If you don't have a Bible, you can take the one that's in the chair next to you. You can take it home as a gift. If you reach for a Bible and another person reaches for it, that means that's their Bible. So just reach for a different one. And it should all work out just fine. We're going to be in Luke 17. If you don't have a Bible, you can also download an app for about any smart device. Whether you're a spiritual skeptic or an explorer or a follower of Jesus, let's dive in together to Luke chapter 17. Now, on his way to Jerusalem, Jesus traveled along the border between Samaria and Galilee. As he was going into a village, 10 men who had leprosy met him. They stood at a distance and called out in a loud voice, "Jesus, Master, have pity on us." When he saw them, he said, "Go, show yourselves to the priests." And as they went, they were cleansed. One of them, when he saw was healed, came back, praising God in a loud voice. He threw himself at Jesus' feet and thanked him, and he was a Samaritan. Jesus asked, "Were not all 10 cleansed? Where are the other 9? Has no one returned to give praise to God except this foreigner?" Then he said to him, "Go and rise. Your faith has made you well." Luke chapter 17, which we're going to be diving into a little bit today. We're in as I said, the last week of a series called Re-Gift. Re-Gift has been based on Acts 20:35. And that verse says that in everything I did, I showed you that by this kind of hard work we must help the weak, remembering the words the Lord Jesus himself said, "It is more blessed to give than to receive." So we know that God loved us, and he loved us so much he gave us the greatest gift of all time. He gave us Jesus so that we could know what he was really like. And now Jesus is teaching us that as great as it is to receive a gift into our lives, it's even better to get to give a gift. God loved us enough to give us Jesus, and how do we respond to that? Well, we receive Jesus into our lives, and then we become people who love enough to give. Receive Jesus into our lives, and then love enough to give. And so that's what we mean by re-gift. When you put a re-colon in front of something, you are saying, this is my response to the issue at hand. So when you say re-gift, you are saying, this is my response to the gift. This is my response to Jesus. And so one of the great questions of this series has been, how is your life a response to the gift? What does your life say re-gift? Today we want to consider together the topic of give money. Now, I know that this can be a topic that puts some people at dis-ease, especially when it was also the theme last week. And will be the theme the next 28 weeks. But as usual, you can expect us to deal with this theme with grace and with truth. It's important to talk about money because money is one of the most tangible ways that we can show our love for God. It offers us one of the most, it's not the only way, it's not the only tangible way, but it is one of the chief ways that we can tangibly show our love for God. We can grow to love God in such a way that we want to tangibly give him something. But to put that in contrast with this, money is also a very important topic because money is perhaps the thing that our society is most tempted to love more than God. Do you see those two things? Now, I'll say political ideology is becoming a pretty quick second. But between those two things is the tension of why we need to talk about money. It can be such a great way to show love to God, but it can be the way that our society is most tempted, the thing we're most tempted to love more than God. I cannot speak for all societies ever, right? But every society ever is more tempted to love something than God. And though I can't tell you what that has been for every society throughout space and time, I can tell you that for the modern American society, money has become that thing which we are more tempted to love more than God. And I realized the grip that material possessions had on our culture, on you and me, when I heard the chaplain of Davidson College speak about a few months ago. He shared about staying with a family for a week in Nicaragua as part of a trip that the college took. This was a very simple home, right? The earth was providing the floor. Now, the family was very kind. They were very hospitable to him. And at the end of the week, when my friend Rob was leaving the house, the mother, she was a widow, so the mother gave Rob a picture of her family. Now, during his week there, Rob had seen just about everything that this family owned. And as best he could tell, there was in the whole house one picture that had the entire family in it. And now that picture was being given to him as a gift. And I thought about that. Because when I go to clean out my closet, and I come to a shirt, if I've thought about wearing it in the past 12 months, I keep it. But then this lady was giving as a gift the only picture she had of her entire family. And that's when I realized the power that material possessions have in my life, probably in your life as well. I love to collect and stockpile. And I've got a lot to learn in this area of life. Now, perhaps a biblical image will be helpful here. Have you ever heard of the Jordan River? Named after Michael Jordan. I have drawn you a picture of the Jordan River. Now, you see Mount Hermon there, and there's snow on the top of Mount Hermon. And when the snow, you see the Mediterranean Sea. This is where we are. We're east of the Mediterranean. When the snow melts on Mount Hermon, it runs down the mountain and becomes the Jordan River. The Jordan River then runs into what's called the Sea of Galilee. It'd be like calling it, the Sea of Norman. It's really a lake. And so it runs through there, and then it runs out of there into the Dead Sea where it all collects. That's how the Jordan River works. I want to talk about the Sea of Galilee and the Dead Sea. The water in the Sea of Galilee is the same water that's in the Dead Sea. Do you remember that? It's the same water. The major difference between the Sea of Galilee and the Dead Sea is not the water, it's the flow. You see, the Dead Sea receives and receives, receives and receives. It has no outlet. Now, the Sea of Galilee receives and gives, receives and gives. It receives water from the Jordan River, but it also has an outlet to give back to the Jordan River. The difference between the Sea of Galilee and the Dead Sea could be summed up in one word, and that word was flow. Or in other words, life. Look at the difference between the two. I want you to have a picture here, the Sea of Galilee for you. That's a picture of the Sea of Galilee. Look at the greenery, the water. Now let's zoom it out. This is a more zoomed out picture of the Sea of Galilee. Look at that. Now let me show you a picture of the Dead Sea. Stark. The water is beautiful, but there's no life. There's no life. There are no animals that live in the water. There's no life on the shore. Sure, the locals love to come and cut loose, floating in the Dead Sea. See, all work and no play. I love the sunglasses. I Googled images of Dead Sea, and that came up, and so I had to, throw that in somehow. All work and no play works cross-culturally. But if you look at this Dead Sea, there's no life. So do you see the difference that flow makes? Do you see how flow and life are related? Do you see how life exists where you can receive and give? not just receive. Life is not simply found in receiving. That is the great lie of materialism. Life is found in receiving and giving. Now let me tell you where this sermon is not going. So I'm not about to say, so you need to give all your money to the church. Or if you aren't that committed to God, you should at least feel guilty about every dollar that you don't give to the church. That's where we're not going. The Bible is in fact clear that there are a number of things our money can and should be used for. I have a very non-exhaustive list. This is only 3 such things. The Bible encourages us to use money for savings. Proverbs 6 through 8. The Bible in this passage and in others encourages us to save money. The Bible encourages us to use money for caring for vulnerable family members. 1 Timothy 5 and 4. Paul's teaching in this passage that caring for the needs of those who cannot care for themselves falls first and foremost to the family. Now, it can be a struggle to care for aging parents and aging grandparents. I've seen that, and I imagine you've seen that over and over again. But the Bible is teaching that even though it can be a struggle, it often is a struggle, it is a great way to show love to another person, giving them money and time as a way to say, I love you. The Bible's very clear about that. The Bible also encourages us to use money for enjoyment. 1 Timothy 6:17 to 18. Mike taught on this verse. Mike Moses, the pastor of Lake Forest, taught on these verses last week. I'd encourage you to write them down because I'm going to come back to them. Just write down the reference. I'm going to come back to them at the end. Enjoyment. So we're not teaching don't take any vacations, don't have any fun, don't go to a restaurant if it costs more than the Taco Bell, right? God gave us money so that we might be able to enjoy it. What I am teaching is in the midst of our enjoyment, let's have some flow. Let's have some flow when it comes to money. Let's receive and enjoy and give. Now, God has a way that He builds flow into the lives of people who are following Jesus. And that method is called giving tithes and offerings. Giving tithes and offerings. Giving tithes and offerings is God's way of building flow into the lives of people who follow Jesus. Giving tithes and offerings to what God is doing in the world. God's work in the world. Now, a tithe is a fancy old word, and it means a tenth. That's what a tithe means. God's desire is that we would give a tenth of what we make to His work in the world. And offerings refers to anything additional that we want to give to the work of God in the world. So as you show your love for God, as your love for God bubbles up so much that you want to give tithes and offerings to God's work in the world, God is teaching you'll also experience great flow in your life. And as we've seen, flow can often be the thing that gives us life. Remember the Dead Sea and the Sea of Galilee. Now all of this brings us back to the account of Jesus that I read earlier from Luke 17. Because we see an example of someone who has flow in their life. You remember what happened? There were 10 folks, and they had leprosy, or as your footnote will tell you, they had some type of skin disease. Now, folks with this sort of skin disease were regularly excluded from towns and from cities until they were cured. So this disease had interrupted the lives of these 10 people. Do you see that? When you came down with this leprosy or whatever this skin disease was, you were excluded from town. So you were cut off from your family, your friends, your livelihood, your life. It all was on hold until you were cured because you had to go outside of the town. They see Jesus walking by, and Jesus told them to go and show themselves to a priest. And so then mile after mile, kilometer after kilometer, right? Don't want to discriminate against the metric system. Kilometer after kilometer, as they walked, with each step that they took, they realized they were getting better. They kept walking until they realized they were finally healed. They could start to live again. They weren't outcasts anymore, thanks to the goodness of God. Jesus walked up into their lives, and as they trusted him, he gave them their lives back. Jesus walked into their lives, and as they trusted him, he gave them their lives back. Man, if this were the gift series, this is where I would camp out for 10 minutes. Because this is quite something. If you've seen this in your life or you've seen this in the life of another person, there's just something powerful. When Jesus comes up into your life and he sets your feet in the direction of life and he says, now let's start walking together. That's a powerful thing to see. And I would camp out here, but I cannot camp out here. This is re-gift, so I have to keep on moving. So of the 10 people healed, one comes back to say thank you to Jesus. It is a great thing to see the flow in this man's life. You see, he received and he enjoyed, and then he came back to Jesus to say thank you. But where are the other 9? Were not 10 people healed, Jesus asked? Why did only one manage to make it back to say thank you? It seems that the other 9 received and enjoyed and moved right on to the next thing. They were well, and they had their lives back, and so it was right back to their lives. The way they wanted to live. I'm going to do it my way. This is sort of how my life's going to operate. They received, enjoyed, went right on to the next thing. We can be like those 9, can't we? I know I can. We can act like the 9, and we can lose sight of all that God has done through us through the gift of Jesus. We can totally forget about all the gifts that God has given to us in our lives. We receive and enjoy and move right on to the next thing. When we're acting like the 9, we always want to talk about things like, my roof is leaking. When we're more like the 1, we have the courage to say, thank you, God, I have a roof over my head. This is about flow. This is about life. Not receive and enjoy and move right on to the next thing. Receive and enjoy and give. The gift of Jesus in my life would be enough. God's gift to me through Jesus would be enough. The love of God, the forgiveness of God would be enough. If the only thing God ever gave me was Jesus, that would be enough. But that's not where God stopped. Think about all the gifts in your life, the blessings in your life, relational blessings and health blessings and financial blessings, all that God has given to you. And when we start to talk about financial things, we have to recognize that everything comes from God. Every dollar we make is a gift from God. You say, well, I work hard for the dollars I earn. So do I. But my abilities have been given to me by God. My brain was given to me by God. My hands, my feet, my legs, my ability to think and be strategic, and that all came from God. It all comes from God. And for the sake of flow, for the sake of us looking more like the Sea of Galilee than the Dead Sea, the Bible teaches that 10%, that a tithe comes back to the work of God in the world. In other words, 10% comes back to Jesus to say thank you. I just made the turn. Because I wasn't a Davidson math major. Actually, I was. But when you have 10 people with leprosy, and one of them comes back to say thank you to Jesus, what is that? It's a tithe. It's 10%. It's 1 in 10. Now, how does that strike you? How does that strike you when 1 of 10 men, when a tenth comes back to say thank you? See, when pastors start talking about giving tithes and offerings, we want to spend a lot of time debating about the tenth. We want to spend a lot of time talking about the part that comes back to Jesus. I think this account from the life of Jesus raises a far more interesting question. What's going on in the part that doesn't come back to Jesus? What's going on there? What is so pressing? What is so urgent? What is so important that Jesus doesn't even get a thank you? I think about that 10%, that tenth, that tithe, that one guy who comes back. I look at the flow in his life, and I say, he's got something to teach me. You realize he had just gotten his life back, too. There were a lot of urgent things in that man's life. Do you agree? There were a lot of pressing things in that man's life. Do you agree? And the most pressing was to say thank you to Jesus. I woke up on this side of the dirt today, and I want to say thank you to Jesus. I came here in a car that runs. I want to say thank you to Jesus. I'm going to eat food later today with somebody who cares about me. I want to say thank you to Jesus. When I think about where my life would be without God, when I think of the shame that was holding me down, when I think of the addiction that was destroying my life, when I think of the failures that were defining me, when I think of all the bridges I burned, I may look cleaned up today, I may have a Bible in my lap today, but if it had not been for God, if it had not been for Jesus walking up into my life and giving me my life back, when I think of all that God has done for me, I want to say thank you. Thank you. Thank you to Jesus. Ultimately, I want my whole life to say thank you to Jesus. I want to love my neighbors. I want to love my family, to say thank you to Jesus. I want to prioritize the spiritual part of my life, and I'm prioritizing it to say thank you to Jesus. I want to care about people who are poor, and I want to do that to say thank you to Jesus. Saw a great opportunity to do that when I was walking into church today. Did you? When nobody's looking, the way I live my life, when nobody else is seeing it, I want that to say thank you to Jesus. Do you see that this is not principally about behavior modification? This is principally about head and heart transformation. Letting gratitude take such deep root in your head and in your heart that generosity just overflows. That's what this is about. This is about allowing gratitude to lead to generosity. I want my whole life to say thank you to Jesus because I realize what he's done for me. I realize all that he gives me. Actually, I don't realize all that he gives me. I realize just enough to know he's been good to me. This is about flow. This is about life. And this gratitude that leads to generosity, it often takes shape in our life. It gains traction in our life. It starts to gain momentum when the most pressing need for at least 10% is to come back to Jesus and say thank you. And say thank you. So as we close down with our message time, we're about to have after this a time of prayer and reflection, and for Christians, a time of receiving communion. And so I want to just move forward with a challenge for different groups of people in the room. One will be for Christians, for those who follow Jesus. One will be for spiritual explorers and skeptics. I'm just going to admit the challenge to Christians is not sugar-coated. I'm not any good at sugar-coating, and so I didn't really even try. If you're a Christian, my question and challenge to you today would be, what percentage of your money comes back to Jesus to say thank you? Now, that is not a sugar-coated question. But it is also not meant to be a question that shames or guilts anybody, because that's not what we're talking about. What I'm trying to do is get us to deal in reality. That's what I want, reality. I'm asking a tough question and holding up a mirror. Not for guilt, not for shame, but for reality. And I want to ask you, how much do you give to the work of God in the world? Where does that stack up with where you'd like to be? Where does that stack up with the story about the 10 lepers? Where does it stack up? And I'd love for you and God, and if you're married, your spouse, to have an honest conversation about this. That's all I would ask. What am I? What is my family? What are we giving to the work of God in the world? How does it stack up with where we want to be, with how the lepers responded? How does it work itself out? Where is it with where we want to be? How generous do we want to get to be? And then you begin to think of a plan. How do I move to giving tithes and offerings to the work of God in the world? You ready for this? This is a brilliant insight. 1% at a time. That's how you do anything. How do you follow a person? One step at a time. So you just get honest about your budget and you figure out where stuff is going. You may not have any idea, but you start to get it together. We have a class here at the church called Financial Peace. It happens every fall. It'll happen again this fall, and it can help you get sense of your finances. You do it 1% at a time, but it starts with having an honest conversation. And we can be honest. Now, if you're a spiritual explorer or skeptic, my challenge to you would be to read 1 Timothy 6, 17 and 18. What do you think God is trying to teach you personally through these words? Mike taught on this passage last week. If you were here, it saved you the reading 2 verses of the Bible. But the idea is, what is God trying to teach you? What is He trying to say to you? What might it mean to you? I'm not going to be prescriptive and say this is what you have to take out of it. There's a lot of great stuff. But what do you think God is trying to say to you specifically? You're not here on accident this morning. God has something to say to you, something to teach you. And I think this is such a great and rich passage that it deserves our further consideration. So if you are an explorer or skeptic here today, I would encourage you, take a Bible or look at one online and just read that little passage and see what God might teach you through it. In the end, I just need to say this. I know this is a generous congregation. I've drawn a salary from this congregation for the last 5 years. The reason I have shoes is because of the generosity of this congregation. So that's not what this sermon is about. I need better shoes or something like that. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about flow. We're talking about you. We're talking about your relationship with God, your love of God. How does that bubble over into how you live your life? It's my contention that as gratitude takes deep root in your heart and mind, you couldn't stop the generosity if you wanted to. You just couldn't. Let's move to a time of prayer, reflection, and for Christians, communion. If you'd like to be prayed for as we close out today, you can do that going out these doors and to your right. I hope you go today knowing that God loves you, He made you, He cares for you, He's going ahead of you to prepare the way, behind you to push you along the way, above you to protect you, to below you to support you, most important, beside you to be your friend. I pray you see that more and more each day. Go in peace.